Jessica Levinson right now. Jessica, can you hear us? I know it's a bit fluid right now, but I want to make sure we see you. Do you hear hear us clearly?
I do. I do. And if you need a cutaway, no problem at all.
We're keeping our eye, of course, there on the ground. But Jessica, we know that the president has deployed 2,000 National Guardsmen to Los Angeles. We're expecting them in the next 24 hours. We spoke to U.S. Attorney Bill Essayli telling us that they will make their presence known. Your thoughts on that move tonight?
So I think we need to focus right now on what the president is doing and what he is not doing. At this point, he has looked to authority he has under a federal statute, Title 10, which essentially allows him to call up the National Guard to provide some sort of backup, some personnel assistance to ICE and other federal law enforcement. This is very different than if he does ultimately invoke the Insurrection Act. That is an exception to the Posse Comitatus Act, which says in general that the military should not act as a domestic law enforcement force or body. And so what we're looking at here is, does the president keep this at Title 10, which essentially, again, allows the National Guard to come in a supporting role only? Or are we looking at invoking the Insurrection Act, which is an exception to the general rule that the military really can't act like a domestic police force? That would provide the National Guard with a lot more substantive authority. And that would, I would offer, be something that I don't think historically we've ever seen, where you have a president against the wishes of the governor and the mayor, sending in the National Guard to perform some potentially extensive functions.
So really, this is no way routine.
So I want to be careful with routine in the sense that I wouldn't view this as routine, no. But I do think we need to just, at this moment, when everything's moving, when news is breaking, be careful as to which authority the president is using and what that allows the National Guard to do. I will certainly say, is this something that happens on a weekly basis? No. Is this something that we're accustomed to? It's not. But it's more limited, I think, than maybe what some people originally think when you hear the president sending in the National Guard. I'm not trying to downplay this. I'm trying to highlight the legal differences and where we are, I think, at this moment tonight.
And I think to highlight that, Jessica, the last time the Insurrection Act was invoked was back in 1992 for the LA riots, when President George H.W. Bush deployed thousands of federal troops to Los Angeles. But that goes to your point in saying that was requested. In this case, it would go directly against the desire of the mayor, of the governor as well. So it sounds like this would be quite a level of shock if it even rose to that type of situation.
Right. And of course, with the Los Angeles riots, I think we could, at least in retrospect, see that those looked different in depth and breadth. And I think a huge difference, obviously, legally, is at that point you have local law enforcement and local elected officials saying, we need some help. And so what you typically would see in the rare occasions when we have had this type of civil unrest is cooperation between our two separate sovereigns, cooperation between the state and the federal government. At this point, that's not what we're seeing tonight.
And tonight we're hearing possibly that President Trump has spoken with Governor Gavin Newsom, but both have put out their statements, and Newsom's pretty much saying we do not want the National Guard here. Is this something that local leaders can really battle legally against?
So they can try. I mean, let's lay out some kind of broad legal issues here, which is that, one, states are separate sovereigns, and the federal government can't, in some instances, commandeer the state. You can't, for instance, tell LAPD, now you will go act as an agent of ICE. Now you will go enforce federal law. But what we see is that there are federal laws on the books that provide the president with broad authority, particularly when the president says there's an emergency, there's civil unrest, there's violence. The ability of federal law enforcement to enforce federal laws is being undermined. In those cases, then the president does have the power, I think, to override what the states and the localities want. So where you would see the fighting is whether or not this truly is the type of situation that would allow the president to say to a governor, to a mayor, essentially, I don't care that you don't want the National Guard. Here's why I have the authority to send them anyway.
And would that take a next step, too? Because I want to draw in the fact that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth earlier tonight said, in addition to mobilizing the National Guard immediately, saying if violence continues, active duty Marines at Camp Pendleton will also be mobilized, that they are on high alert. Is that a natural escalation of this sort of situation, or is that another sort of questionable or otherwise confusing thing that the Trump administration is considering doing?
So I think at this point, it's a statement that the Trump administration is prepared to throw the full weight of the military behind their view that there is civil unrest, that there is violence, and that there is the need to send in not just potentially the National Guard, but also the Marines. Again, I just want to pause and say at this point, as far as I've seen the reporting at this moment, it's not using the Insurrection Act right now. It's using Title 10. It's not saying that the National Guard will be able to do more than provide support and logistical support, personnel support. It's not to say that this doesn't change in the next hours. But when we talk about the type of legal power, when we talk about the type of legal limits, those are the things that I'm thinking of. Which particular statute is the president pointing to, and what does that allow him to do?
It's important to point that out for us. Law professor at Loyola Law School, Jessica Levinson, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And of course, always giving us your legal perspective. Thank you again.
Thank you.